Good day, students, and welcome to today's session where we will discuss derivative acquisition of ownership. Please take note that this is merely a brief overview of the specific unit. You are expected to master the entire content of this unit in your own time. Now, what is derivative acquisition of ownership? Derivative methods of acquiring ownership occur with the cooperation of a predecessor in title. As you will recall, in the case of original acquisition of ownership, there is no cooperation with a predecessor in title. So with reference to derivative acquisition of ownership, the right which the transferee obtains is derived from the former owner. This implies that the predecessor in title should himself have been the owner and entitled to transfer ownership. Hence the principle, no one can transfer more rights to another person than he has himself. Now, the transfer of ownership will only take place where there is a valid agreement together with a form of conveyance. In the case of movables, transfer of ownership will take place by means of delivery, and in the case of immovable property, transfer of ownership will occur by means of registration in the deeds registry. Now, in the case of movables, for successful delivery of movables, there must be the intention or the mental element to transfer ownership, as well as physical control of the property. Now, what are the general requirements for a valid transfer of ownership? The transferor must have contractual capacity. The transferor must be the lawful owner of the thing. The transferor must consent to transfer ownership and delivery in the case of movables or registration in the case of immovables. The transferee must have the contractual capacity to accept the transfer of ownership. Furthermore, the transferee must accept the transfer of ownership by the transferor. Transfer occurs in two ways, as I've mentioned earlier, delivery in the case of movables and registration in the deeds registry for immovable property. Now, ownership of movable things is transferred by means of delivery, as mentioned before. Delivery consists of two elements. There must be a physical element and there must be a mental element. Both elements must be present at the time of ownership, at the time of transfer of ownership. The physical element can be fulfilled in different ways. Now, delivery can take two forms. Actual delivery, which indicates that the movable is actually handed over to the transferee in such a way that the transferee is able to exercise physical control with the intention to be the owner of the property. Another form of delivery is constructive delivery. This normally takes place where the act of transfer is not as explicit as in the case of actual delivery, but where a change occurs in the intention with which the thing is controlled, which indicates the intention that ownership is transferred. Now, in the case of constructive delivery, three different situations can be distinguished. The transferee may be placed in a position to exercise physical control of the thing. An example of that would be symbolic delivery or delivery with the long hand. Secondly, the transferee may already be in physical control by virtue of some other legal relationship, and an example thereof would be delivery with the shorthand. Or the transferee may be in a position where someone else exercises physical control on his or her behalf, and an example thereof would be Constitutum, possessorium, and Attornment. Now let's look at one of the modes of delivery. The first example is Clavium Traditio. Now, things which cannot be physically handed over owing to their nature or size are handed over symbolically in the sense that a token or symbol of the thing is delivered. This is intended to indicate that the transfer of physical control has taken place. And the best known example of transfer of ownership of a motor vehicle is when the keys are handed over to the purchaser. Or in the case of a warehouse filled with goods, if the key of the warehouse is handed over to the purchaser of the goods. So by handing over the key, it is considered that the motor vehicle or the goods in the warehouse has been delivered. In this way, the transferee obtains exclusive control over the thing. Now, there are 3 requirements that need to be complied with for symbolic delivery to take place. So delivery occurs when an instrument of access is delivered, such as a key, provided that there is exclusive physical control of the thing, and thirdly, provided that the thing is handed over to the transferee. Another mode of delivery of movables is Traditio longa manu, or also known as longhand delivery. Now, this method is used when actual delivery is impossible due to the size or nature of the thing. The thing cannot be physically delivered. Instead, the thing is pointed out literally, and the transferee is placed in a position enabling her to exercise physical control. An example would be steel towers, and I refer you to the case of Eskom versus Rollomatic Engineering, which sets out the example of Traditio longa manu. Now, delivery in the case of Traditio longa manu will occur where the parties have the intention to resort to this form of delivery, meaning they have to decide, listen here, we are going to transfer ownership of this movable thing by means of Traditio longa manu. Secondly, delivery occurs where the property has been pointed out clearly by the transferor to the transferee. Thirdly, the transferee must be able to exercise some physical control over the property with the intention to be the owner. And this requirement was problematic in the Eskom versus Rollomatic Engineering case. Fourthly, the thing must be clearly identified. Exclusive access to the thing is not required. Please see, in this regard, see Groenewald versus Van der Merwe. Another mode of delivery of movable goods is Constitutum possessorium. Now, Constitutum possessorium is based on a contractual agreement where the parties consent to the transferor's continued possession of the property with the consent of the new owner. The previous owner remains in possession of the property, therefore the mental element is the only indicator of whether there was a transfer of ownership. And an example illustrating Constitutum possessorium is a garment bought and paid for, but when you leave the garment with the seller in order for the seller to make alterations to the garment. Or if you've purchased a watch and you've paid for it, but you leave it at the seller in order for the watch to be serviced. Those examples constitutes Constitutum possessorium. Now, there are certain requirements that need to be complied with for delivery to have taken place, for Constitutum possessorium to have taken place. The party who relies on Constitutum possessorium must provide clear factual evidence from which such an inference follows. Secondly, the transferor must be the owner and must be in possession at the time of transfer. Thirdly, the transfer must cease to possess for himself and begin to possess for the transferee. And fourthly, there must be a clearly proved causa in the form of a clearly proven contractual relationship. Another mode of delivery is attornment. Delivery by attornment takes place if ownership of a movable must be transferred by owner A to B, but at the same time of delivery, the movable is in the physical control of C, who exercises physical control in terms of a valid legal cause. Ownership is transferred to B, if C agrees to exercise physical control on behalf of B and no longer on behalf of A. Now, the requirements for attornment are the following. There must be a tripartite agreement between the transferor, the transferee, and the third party holder, in terms of which the holder will continue to hold for the transferee and no longer for the transferor. All three parties therefore consent to the transfer of ownership. The holder should exercise physical control at the moment of transfer from the transferor to the transferee. And that concludes the various modes of transfer of ownership of movable goods. Now we will be focusing on transfer of ownership of immovable property. Now, in the case of immovable property, when purchasing immovable property, registration is required for the creation, for the transfer and termination of all real rights in immovable property. So when you purchase a house, registration needs to take place in the deeds registry in accordance with the Deeds Registries Act for ownership to be transferred. This is a manifestation of the delivery requirement for the transfer of ownership of immovables. Now, registration of rights in immovable property has the effect that the person concerned is deemed to be the lawful owner of the right. Secondly, registration is regarded as notice to the rest of the world of the validity of the right of ownership. Lastly, it's important for you to take note that South Africa uses a negative registration system where the facts on the deed are not guaranteed. This means that the correctness of the registered information is not guaranteed. And this concludes today's session. Thank you.